And we are back live once again. It is the spin cycle. We've got the full house with you today. Andrew Southwick with you, R.C. Williams, and Juliana Ormond here today just to have a little lunchtime chat about what's going on in the news. I am also, as you can see, depending on the color of your screen, maybe my jacket is silver, maybe it's gold. I don't know. Maybe it could be one of those memes, like the blue dress and the yellow dress or whatever it was from a million years ago. I don't know. It's actually the sun coming from a window above me. I'll get that fixed pretty soon. But right now, I'll just have this nice ray of God-made sun on my shoulders. I am the literal embodiment of John Denver's sunshine on my shoulders. Okay. For those of you who get that reference, join me.
You're old.
Yeah, join me in in applying for some kind of retirement benefit. Okay, we have a lot to do. It is Wednesday. We are right after the Florida primaries, and I think, friends, that the Florida primary was clarifying. Now, I mentioned to you before we came on the air that it was my oldest son's first vote, and this will be his first election in the midterm coming up. But he voted in the primary, and I said, congratulations, welcome to being a conservative in the Republican Party. In that everybody you voted for lost, in the primary. And that's true. Most people, except for a couple. But and then now you can get ready to have your values be betrayed after the general. So we're getting in the full experience of the GOP voting apparatus. But I think it's clarifying because we talked a couple of years ago, or we spoke a couple of years ago, before the 24 general about, and it was right after, because we covered the GOP changing their platform, changing things on abortion, changing things on LGBT stuff and all that. And they did it behind closed doors, so on and so forth. And I said at the time, and we talked about at the time, how the GOP had been bragging about their big tent. They're open to everybody. They'll listen to everybody. They've got room for all views, all opinions, blah, blah, blah. Except they proved that that's not true. And I said they've moved left. They've picked up the tent and they've moved it left. There's a bunch of people over here who are not on the tent anymore. They're on the right. And the GOP left them and moved left. And I think what we saw in the Florida primary, and actually also in Wyoming, where, by the way, the Freedom Caucus candidates took a shellacking to more progressive GOP candidates in the Wyoming primary. And I've got some stuff on that if we have time to get to it. But the GOP has moved left. And now what's interesting is they will appear conservative, but only in contrast to the communists who are running in the Democrat Party. This is where we've come, and we're seeing already online and social media. Okay, all right, you GOP conservatives or you far right whatevers. It's time to get in line, and we got to vote for this but the Democrats. And again, until we stop playing that game and say no, because when you look at, I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling here, but stay with me. Sophie Cunningham, WNBA, was just booed in Canada because she doesn't want to play against dudes. That's why. She doesn't want to play against dudes. And what that tells you is on the left and the progressives, they demand fealty to their worldview. And they get it. We don't do that. We don't hold anybody accountable. And honestly, us as conservatives who want accountability, we don't hold our people accountable because ultimately our sacrificial lambs go up there and they lose in the primaries. Then we all fold in the general because we say, but the Democrats. Then we get screwed over in the actual legislative terms, and then we do it all over again. There's never any electoral accountability. There's never any public accountability or media accountability, particularly from the right. And at least for me, I'm not, I'm done playing that game. But we're already seeing that now. Just fall in line, get back, vote Republican. Otherwise, we're going to have communists running the joint. Meanwhile, you could argue that there's a fair amount of globalist communists and technocrats and so on and corporatists that have already purchased the GOP that we're going to vote for in November. So anyway, Hi, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Oh boy.
Anyway, let me bring to the stage some of the Florida primary results here. Make sure I've got the right three-shot media. That's a little bit better. You can see here, this is just a basic, just a snapshot of the primary. 52 0.11, 52.11 percent of Republican gubernatorial voters voted for someone other than Byron Donalds. He did win by a wide margin, but he did not win. But he did not get over 50%. And so between Renner and Collins, who actually came in second, Collins dominated in a lot of the rural counties in North Florida. Donalds won the suburban and the cities in Central Florida and going south. And then you had a smattering for Renner, a smattering for Fishback. When you combine those, you have effectively just about a tie within 2 or 3 percentage points margin of error. So that is interesting to see. And I've got a couple other graphics here that I'll put up as we have this conversation. But Arcia and Juliana, whoever wants to go first, I believe this is a clarifying moment, and I'm actually refreshed because now I know where the GOP stands. Now I know what the GOP's interests are and who they're really beholden to. So I can now enter the midterms a little bit clearer with that understanding and can vote accordingly. Do you think this is a clarifying moment for the GOP, or do you think we're just politics as usual? Do you think we should just get in line because but the Democrats or but the communists? Where do you fall? I really do think this is a clarifying moment.
Julian, I'll let you have at it first.
No, I just want to say that literally, we the people didn't win yesterday. I mean, we didn't, because we're fighting for people that are grassroots, people that are really going to be representing we the people, not they, the big money. At this point, we're looking at money that has been infused in these politicians. They have been able to overrun what it is that we want to have happen in our communities. And at this point, we can't be aligned with the Republican Party. Like you said, Andrew, they've left us, just like the Democrats left the real blue dog Democrats, the Republicans have now left us. 2 years ago this month, they are no longer pro-life. They're now pro-choice. So they're not even kind of sort of conservative anymore. There's no, correlation between a conservative and a Republican anymore. So we, the kingdom people, we the ones that are more conservative, that we're saying, looking back at what's going on, need to come together and say, this is not a R thing or a D thing. We need to strategize, just like they strategize about how they're going to come at us. Like, for example, 11 people trying to run for governor, like, that's ridiculous. The Democrats wouldn't do that, but you want to talk about how we lost? We lost because of that kind of shenanigans. So if we know that they're doing those types of shenanigans, we the people need to come together and stop saying, well, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. No, we're the people that are on the ground being impacted by what's happening here. We need to come together and say, we need to strategize. There's obviously a system. We need to learn how to play the system. Just like they play the system against us, we need to learn to play the same exact system so that we can take control over what's happening over here, because there's only really two parties. There's those that are for father, and there are those that are not for father. It's not a DR, it's a for father, not for father. And we, the people that are for father, we need to come together and do the things that we need to be doing for our communities, because this government is not for father. They are against father. That's all I have to say about the situation.
I see. Before you jump in, whatever,
Yeah,
hold your thought, but I want to ask a follow-up question to you based on what Juliana just said. She
sure.
talks about we need to come together, right? Well, and
Mhm.
use their tactics, so on and so forth. Well, one of the tactics that's often used, at least by Democrats, because they're good at politics, Republicans aren't, but is so. Let me use a pro wrestling analogy, right? WWE. They have an event called the Royal Rumble. It's every January. A bunch of guys in the ring. The object is throw your opponent over the top rope, last man standing. Okay. And I understand wrestling is scripted, so don't send me emails for crying out loud. I get it. It's still awesome. Shut up. All right. Now, um, if they had somebody huge in there, like Andre the Giant, or maybe, or if you want to talk about Undertaker, people probably know that, even though he's retired for several years. Well, what would happen is all the little guys in the ring would gang up against the big guy and get him out, right? If we agreed, and I think we did on the Republican conservative side, that Byron Donalds was the big guy in the ring. He had the money, he had the endorsements, he's got the establishment, he's got all that wind behind him. Why didn't Renner, Collins, Fishback, whoever else, why didn't they get together and focus their fire on Donalds in the primary instead of biting each other and focus on Toplid, the big guy? Wouldn't that be kind of how we come together? We're going to have to start doing that at some point.
So I just want to, and I'm sorry, RC, I just want to say this real quick. So we, the people, were behind the scenes having conversations with, Fishback and Renner and doing the whole, how can we come together and have you guys work together? Well, Fishback has a history. So Renner's like, I'm not going to run with him. So there was no way of pairing up our guys to say, look, can one of you take the pole position and do I'm going to be governor, and then one of you do the lieutenant governor? We were like, if it was Renner and a Fishback, it would have been great. But all this stuff happened with Fishback.
I don't mean pairing up. I mean, if they had all focused their messaging individually on Byron Donalds and exposing Byron Donalds for who he is.
But it still splits the vote. But it still splits the vote. I mean, we had too many people.
It would, but when you have that 47% that went to Donalds, maybe some of those would peel off, and you end up having a more even plurality. And if it was closer to a 30% plurality, yeah, you'd have a split vote, but you might not have a Donalds victory. Wouldn't it?
I'm going to let RC speak to this. Again.
So, Andrew, I think it's interesting that you use the wrestling analogy. The other thing that happens in pro wrestling, the old saying goes that everyone at some point in their career is going to do the job. That means that you're going to lay down for somebody else. Hang on to that one for a second, because we're in pretty interesting times. But to Juliana's point, we had, and it wasn't just in the governor's race. I'm going to expand for a bit, then I'll come back directly to your questions. We had races throughout the state of Florida where people who had no chance whatsoever and were completely and utterly useless, ran for no good reason, ended up sucking up resources and making a gigantic mess of things. Thanks so much for that. It's much clearer on August 19th when it's nice and quiet. Back to the governor's thing. As Juliana said, it was interesting that we could not get anyone to coalesce necessarily because everybody wanted to be the boss. Now, look, I get it. If you've got some name recognition, you believe that you're the best guy, right? And everybody had their issues with everybody else. Here's the thing, Andrew. Even if they did coalesce, I don't think there was enough there to catch Byron. And here's why. And here's where the rub is. When you get that far out in front and coronations for a primary that's happening in August of 2026 start in March of 2025, you know exactly what the apparatus is going to do. I've said on the show, and I said this before, I said, I don't want this to be the case. But when that much money and that much endorsement coalesces behind somebody, they're going to win. And I've said this before, I will say it again. There are bigger plans for Byron and Erica Donalds that end up in Washington, D.C. But in order for that to happen, he has to be the governor of the state of Florida first. So let's talk a bit about what you now have to look forward to come November. The number that the Donalds team is going to look for is somewhere between 49 and 52%, right? And you're already kind of seeing this in their initial polling. A lot of the polls, the Democratic polls, have Jolly ahead by a point. So it's basically 46-45, obviously within the range of error. But I think that the Donalds team probably believes that it may be tighter because there's stuff that we still don't know what's going to come out yet. But I think they're looking somewhere between 49 and 52%. For those who think that Donalds has a cakewalk from here out, I think you'll be sorely disappointed. This race is going to end up being a lot tighter than people expect. And Valerie Wirtz, who's a regular on Culture Crossroads, has made a very good point in her post-game analysis on this. Please don't think for 1 minute that conservatives are disenfranchised and are just simply not going to vote. Many of them are going to make their voices heard. And what you have to be afraid is that 10% or so that James Fishback got, because those disenfranchised young people can now flip back to MPA. And who knows what they're going to do. That 10%, Andrew, could make the difference in the gubernatorial election. And I think that if the Donalds team glosses over that, they're going to be in for a fight. It's almost like they're Apollo Creed and they think they can knock him out in the first round. Well, he came for a show and they came for a fight. And this thing goes into deep water. I don't know how that works out.
We don't have any exit polling yet on demographics. I think that's going to tell us quite a bit as well. And I'll be curious to get those. I've got my my notifications on for whenever that information comes out, because I do want to see that. But one early, it's unofficial, and even the numbers we're putting online right now, they are from the Florida elections, but they're still technically unofficial because they haven't finalized all that. But there is some unofficial exit polling that for the college campuses and young adults, that they were overwhelmingly in the counties where Fishback got the most concentration. He didn't win, but the most concentration, that group went for Fishback, and in a wide gap. So it'll be curious to see how that plays out. I wonder. We'll go on one more question here. Do you think there are any? Because I think there are. I still think there's plenty of Oppo research to come out from the Jolly campaign, the Democrat side, against Byron Donalds, that did not get fleshed out in the primary, which is, I think, going to be to the Republicans' detriment. I'm not saying we're going to lose. I wonder if the Republican. I think Florida got so deep red at the last cycle. There might be enough there to withstand that. And it could go back to a very tight race. And have Donald still win in terms of just a Republican victory for whatever sake that is. But do you anticipate that Oppo research to come out? And is there anything that I don't want to cast aspersions or accusations right now, but is there any story that's brewing that you are most concerned about the Democrats using going forward, as now we hit a couple of months to the general?
RC?
So Andrew, yeah, hey, I'm here. Sorry. So Andrew, what I was thinking about was what we thought the Democrats had under their hat was the piece that came out about Byron Donalds and Corey Mills.
Right.
That came out a bit early from Fishback's side. So hard to tell if there's anything else. I'm certain that there's something that they've been holding back on. I do think, Andrew, that the Donalds campaign has kind of a two-edged sword here. Number one is what I mentioned a minute ago. That block of young voters who is disenfranchised and frustrated and follow James Fishback don't necessarily follow Byron Donalds unless Fishback tells them to. Here we are again, where Fishback is holding on to a block of votes that he can use as leverage to get something that he wants out of the deal. The other part of this is how many people who vote Republican or conservative will either not engage or engage down ballot or simply vote the other way, not so much because they dislike Byron Donalds, but they want to send the GOP a message about who's in charge. And now people say, wow, that'd be you voting against your own interest. You know, if you're not going to listen to me, first I'm going to talk to you. Then I'm going to yell at you. Then I'm going to throw something at you. Then I'm going to take something. I'm going to hit you upside of the head. We're kind of at that phase now where you're going to get hit upside the head. And people would much rather deal with the devil they know than the devil that they don't. And they're sick of being steamrolled. Just being honest, as a Republican or someone who votes Republican and is a conservative, I'm a bit done with being steamrolled and talked to. And it just as an aside, for those who aren't in Florida and don't understand our makeup, the Republican Party of Florida, the chairman is Evan Power. Now, Evan Power was set up to win a seat for Congress in North Florida and got absolutely destroyed last night. It was glorious because it was a rebuke against the system. And I don't think that's the end of the story on that, Andrew. I think you're going to see that intensify as time goes on. And people who are like, hey, we need to vote or else we get Democrats. I can appreciate what you're saying, but please understand that this frustration did not start yesterday. People are at a point where this has been bubbling and bubbling. And because conservative leadership won't deal with the elephant in the room, or as the old saying goes, you mess with the bull, you're going to get the horns.
Well, and it was
What's nice.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, what's nice about what happened with Fishback is that we're proving out the fact that the younger demographics are like our grandparents. They're very conservative. You know, the men just want to be able to work a nice job and be able to have a home and have the wife at home and send their kids to college, because at the moment they can't do that. And they're looking to a Fishback to say, hey, can you take us back to the way it used to be, the way America used to be, where we can prosper? Because they're remembering watching us, right, the Gen Xers and the baby boomers, and what the baby boomers had, and how we as Gen Xers had even less, and now we're looking at them and they have even less than we have, and they're going, this is not what we're voting for. We want something conservative. We don't want data centers. We don't want to be killing babies, and we want somebody that is representing our demographics. You know, right now the people that are following with Donald's, those are the real money people. Those are the people that, you know, the older demographics. The younger people and the Gen Xers, we're going, we don't really want that. The normal everyday mom and pop people don't want what's happening here. So Fishback coming out and saying, you know what, I'm going to represent the younger crowd, and I'm going to show the American people how conservative they are, because the media would tell you that, you know, the younger demographics, that they're like, you know, all with the red hair and the green hair and they're all gay and stuff like that. That's actually not true. That's what the media and the propaganda, that's what they're pushing. But in reality, the younger people, they're conservative. And Fishback came out and he was like, you know what, I'm going to represent you guys. Unfortunately, you know, Fishback's got some stuff in his history. So, you know, he wound up, you know, making himself not really a player. But fortunately, he still was saying, you know what, younger guys, I hear your voice. And I know that you want to have a voice at the table. I'm going to help bring that for you.
And I do
So,
think,
Andrew, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So,
Okay.
can I jump in here just for a second? Because I want to piggyback on what Juliana said.
Mhm.
There's also been these musings of the old, where are you going to go if you don't vote
Correct.
Republican? Let me
Correct.
look directly at the camera and address people who are watching this, in particular those who believe that train of thought. Clearly understand that if that is your prevailing belief, something will show up and knife you in the back. You won't see this coming because your arrogance is going to be your undoing. And if you don't believe me, you can just look back at the history of the United States, and then you can explain to me how the Whig Party goes from nobodies to winning offices to eventually getting to the White House. If you don't believe that that can happen again, you've got a really nasty surprise coming. And I think the faster that power brokers understand that, the better off we all are, or deal with the consequences.
But I do think that on the hopeful side of this, the fact that there was such a plurality, the fact that more than half of the state said, no, we actually don't want the establishment candidate.
Right.
That shows a willingness in the state of Florida and from the conservative voters to say, no, we want who we want. And so there's a malleable, there's a little tiny, there's like that first little bubble when you're boiling the water in the pan, that first little bubble that says, okay, maybe we need to get down to business. And I think there's an opportunity for, not saying necessarily James Fishback or a Renner or a Collins or whatever, but there's the germs for a movement there, here rather in Florida, to say, you know what, establishment, we're not just going to take whoever you're going to burp down at us, and we're not going to accept the selection season. We're actually going to elect leaders who represent us and not the corporate interests. And
That's right.
And on that, when you talk about the rise of socialism and communism, I mean, a lot of this could have been avoided if the Republicans had actually demonstrated actual fiscal conservatism and true honest capitalism, as opposed to the corporatism and crony capitalism and corrupt capitalism and venture socialism that they've been doing for the better part of the last 10, 12 years. You know, honestly, Biden presidency included in that. So a lot of this was self-inflicted, but I do think that Republicans are waking up, and I think that's the other thing that we saw out of Florida, is that Republican voters are waking up too. And that doesn't mean it was a rejection necessarily of Trump. It just means we are going to think for ourselves. And I hope that grows, because if we're going to get out of this cycle of uniparty grift, we have to be the ones that supply the leaders to Washington instead of the other way around. All right, next story here. Let me add this to the stage. Oh my goodness, look at that. That's the wrong one. Is that the right one? Let me see. Yeah, it is. This is not the right one. Get this over here. Come on, son. Come on. There we go. ABC sues the FCC. And why, you ask? Well, from voting for our liberty to defending it, ABC and Disney's lawsuit against the FCC is worth examining because two conservative principles here are colliding. Broadcasters that use the public airwaves can legitimately be held accountable to federal law, but the federal government should not be able to threaten broadcast licenses because politicians dislike a network's speech. Now, a lot of this stems from the fact that The View, ABC's flagship morning show, with some of today's, I'll say it, most prominent thinkers, if you will, they are overwhelmingly left wing bias, overwhelmingly progressive, not fair. There is FCC. If, for example, if you have a Republican candidate on during election season, you're also supposed to at least invite the Democrat candidate on. They don't have to come on, but the invitations are supposed to be equal in terms of worldview, political party, so on and so forth. And a big accusation here against Disney or ABC is that they have not lived up to that. Anyway, RC, you have a lot more detail on this as well. What is the story here?
Yeah, Andrew, this has been a long time brewing. Brandon Carr, being the new FCC chair, had made it a priority to take marching orders from the White House on how to handle this. Now, look, in its most simplest form, I want people to think about this. How did we get here, right? Because that's what everybody's saying. I didn't realize that networks could sue the FCC over this type of thing. Why are we here? Well, we are here in part because feelings were hurt. Right now, look, the First Amendment is what it is. People have a right to free speech and free expression and everything like that. And the government is not supposed to meddle in those affairs. Right. So that's pretty clear. Right. And for threats to be made, and this has happened at times in the past, but it hasn't been with as serious a bent as I've seen it maybe over the last 8 to 10 years. Right. Because let's be honest, President Trump does take things personally. And if you dig at him, or you take a stand against him, he'll pop you. He'll try to do something. And at this point, I think he's at this point where he's on a champagne campaign to the degree that he's just going to get whoever he feels like he needs to get. Now, all that said, let me set that aside and let me ask a real practical question. So liberal, conservative, whatever, the ultimate question has to be, and I'm pretty sure that this is in the FCC's filing, is can ABC bear the burden of proof that they are serving the public interest? Because with a license from the Federal Communications Commission, you have to bear that burden, right? There are certain requirements. You had a radio station, your primary function was community service and emergencies. That's why you got a broadcast license and you had a tower and you had to do all of these things, because when the rubber met the road and something serious happened, you were supposed to be ready to communicate instructions in emergencies to the community that you serve. So he asked a hard question. I think this is really the essence of it, Andrew, all personal stuff aside, is ABC is going to have to prove in court, basically, or however this goes down, that they actually do serve the public interest in a way that reflects the license that they were granted. I just think we're seeing for the first time an administration fundamentally challenge that and then put the FCC to work on actually seeing if that's the case.
The timing of this, though, does give ABC some ammunition, because according to Reuters, Carr had ordered the license reviews one day after President Trump urged ABC to fire Jimmy Kimmel. Trump has also repeatedly suggested that broadcasters should lose licenses because of coverage that he regards as unfair or hostile. And now that doesn't prove legally that the FCC's investigation is retaliatory, but it makes the government's motive a more important issue in the case. I think that gives, again, as I said, the ABC some ammunition, and they could actually deflect all the attention onto something like that.
I'd agree with you, Andrew. You have to choose the hill that you want to die on, right? And I don't know that this is necessarily the best one. I'm interested to see what it does for the purposes of case law and precedent. Whether or not it gets to the Supreme Court is unknown. But here's the other thing, and we've talked about this quite a bit across all of our shows and all of our platforms. It's kind of like ruling by executive order. what happens is that, one, it kind of gets done when you're done, but more importantly, they look at it. So your opponents are going to look at this as precedent setting. Well, if you could do it, what happens in 28 if a liberal or a progressive ends up in the White House? Do you not think that they would turn that cannon on? Well, Fox isn't the best example. Newsmax, maybe. Oh, wait, take your pick of any conservative network. Would they then turn the cannon on them and go after all of them? And when asked why they would press that, they say, well, look, the prior administration set the precedent for doing this. We're just trying to make sure that they are serving the public interest. So we just want people to know.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? Well, yeah, let me rephrase that again. What do you think? Is ABC in violation of an FCC standard, just objectively speaking, as far as you understand this? Or is this really a tit for tat? You hurt my feelings, and so now we're gonna use this loophole and go after you, and then we're gonna respond, and because we get some theater out of this. And I mean, when the Jimmy Kimmel stuff happened and they suspended Jimmy Kimmel for being mean, his ratings increased, at least in the immediate aftermath. So, if I'm ABC, some of this is like, this is going to be great headlines, and that we know that there's a good swath of the population that'll eat this up, simply because they hate Trump or they hate Republicans or whatever it might be. Is there any there, or is this just theater in your view?
I really don't think there's any there, Andrew. I do think this is theater, right? And it's sad because what other things are vitally important that need to be dealt with? Right.
The ballroom. You're forgetting the ballroom, RC.
I mean,
you gotta have this ballroom and the reflection pool, for crying in the night. RC, where is your patriotism?
Listen. Hang, stuff that in your shirt pocket for a minute, right? And let's think. Right, what really comes out of this? Like, are you going to plant a flag to make sure that people are held accountable? Or are you just going to waste a ton of taxpayer money going back and forth and eventually settle or have this thing thrown out of court because there isn't really any there? And if there was, by the way, it would be abundantly clear what it was. It would be laid out in painstaking detail. And it would be very easy for a court to say, yeah, there's something here. We should probably investigate that. But right now, I don't see that. It just, in a lot of ways, it feels retaliatory. And that's a waste of time and takes away from all the things we need to worry about. Don't know about you guys, paid $4 a gallon for gas. So yeah, there's some more stuff that's a little bit more important than the president of the United States' feelings about whether or not ABC scuffed his Puma.
Yeah, but we as the American people need to be talking about our First Amendment right. At the end of the day, I feel like we're being squeezed on all different levels because it may not be a big, there at the moment, but then they have precedent and they set laws, right? And it gets tighter and tighter. And before you know it, we're not going to be able to talk about things like, let's talk about, the Florida's IHRA anti-Semitism censorship bill. I mean, that was signed in 2023 in Israel with DeSantis, saying that we can't have our free speech, that if we speak about anything that's anti-Semitic, that we can't speak about those things. I'm sorry, but my First Amendment right trumps everything else. Not that we should be going around and speaking ugly about other groups of people, because that's totally wrong, right? But on the same token, they should be squeezing me and telling me that I can't speak the way that I want to speak about any group of people. That's not right. You're not allowed to do that. You're taking away my sovereignty. So I'm very concerned about what's happening here because they're encroaching on our freedoms.
Andrew, if you take what Juliana said, makes a ton of sense, right? And you put it in context. There was an old adage that soldiers used to use back in the day. I don't hear it as much anymore as I used to. I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'll die for your right to say it.
Exactly.
I think we've lost a lot of that. I don't need to agree with Jimmy Kimmel or ABC. I really don't need to watch either, right? But I will stand up for their right to express themselves, because if we don't do that, it's like anything else, right? If we don't do this in a serious way and respect and adhere to the Constitution, then what are we even doing? Why don't we just become an oligarchy and become England again and have a king, and let's get on with it already?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting close to that. We're getting close to that. One more story, Juliana. You were relatively quiet in that story. That's okay because I know you have more to say here as we wrap up. There is an update in the Caruso case we talked about yesterday. That's the Florida official who was arrested on charges of child indecency with a child,
Yep.
pervy crimes, and it looks like some of those are going to stick anyway. I'm going to put this on the screen. This is from I keep coming to the wrong one. I don't know why I do that. Where'd it go? Here. There, it's been a little bit better. We have here a signing of a bill. Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. You see Randy Fine there. And, of course, Mike Caruso standing behind him. The bill that Governor DeSantis is signing there is to afford the death penalty to child sex predators. And now we have Mike Caruso being arrested on child sex crimes. This is ironic. It is also tragic. I don't want to use this to dance around and say, oh, look at that loser, because there were at least one, if not, at least one person's life and a family's life completely destroyed and turned upside down because of this predatory action and because of him, allegedly. But nonetheless, here you have him, Caruso, standing for, let's put him to death. Meanwhile, what's going on, behind closed doors is horrific. This came off of your Facebook page, Juliana. So go ahead and take the first comments here on this new development in the story.
So there's nothing that makes somebody who's been trafficked more sick to their stomach than to see somebody like this man right here. I won't even say his name, because if they've molested one child, there's 100 other children that haven't been found that they have molested. Do you know how many lives that were impacted by this person? You want to know something? If he signed the we should be, killing those that are predatory to children, he should be the first one, and we should use him as an example that if you touch the children, you will be put to death. Because at this point, these are father's children. Our responsibility is to protect those children. And when we have people in our government that are doing things like this, I mean, at the end of the day, like I said earlier, there's only two sides. There's father's side and there's not father's side. And those that would touch a child is obviously not on father's side, and they should be eliminated. We, the brothers and sisters, my brothers and sisters in Christ, all of us that are the good people need to come together, as I keep saying, because those that have ugly hearts like this man right here, who will be put to death, there are many more of them, and they're all with their circles. They have their own system of how they're doing all of this abuse to all of these children. And we, the good people, need to come together and have our own system so that we can stop what's been happening to the children. Because if we don't stand up and defend the children, who's going to do it? We know for a fact that they're trafficking children. We know for a fact that children are worth a lot of money, especially in the sex trade, because they can get used over and over and over again. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but there is nothing that makes me sicker to my stomach than to think about the fact that somebody is touching a child. And from what I heard, that this man, this is the second generation. It's not like this was a new thing to him. This is the second generation of who he's been touching. Can you imagine that he's now on a second generation of touching children? This is disgusting and deplorable. He should be the first one in the guillotine with his head cut off.
I see. Any follow up there?
I mean, I need to let that land, because there really isn't a follow-up to that. I could give you facts, but they're already out there. What you needed to understand was what Juliana just said, and that perspective. And to anyone who has been abused in this way or who has gone through this, I think that Juliana's sentiment is really where it's at here. Mic drop.
Yeah. Well, we will leave it on that mic drop. And I will say this. Good for the state of Florida, good for Ron DeSantis, good for AG Uthmeyer to bring these charges against someone. Look, again, we talked about it yesterday, RC. We know that our political machine in America, that they will circle the wagons around their people if they think they're going to hold on to power in doing so.
Yep.
And it is to Governor DeSantis and Attorney General Uthmeyer's credit that here's a guy who's a Republican stalwart in Florida who's part of the one championing many of the policies that the three of us would appreciate. And they're going to charge him because it is the right thing to do, and it doesn't matter.
That's right.
It doesn't
Amen.
matter what party affiliation you are. There are certain things that are right and wrong, and the biblical purpose of government is to be avenging, to be an avenging, like an avenging angel, Romans 13, that avenges the wrongs that happen on earth and bring a small measure of justice. The full measure comes with God later, but a small measure of justice here. And I applaud the state of Florida for doing that. And again, here's another example where I hope the state of Florida can be looked at as a roadmap in this way for what America needs to do, because there are not just Mike Caruso's in terms of that particular crime, but we have a whole lot more cretins, criminals, and creeps who are exploiting we the people, who are exploiting the vulnerable for their own financial and powerful gain, and they need to be held accountable just the same.
That's what.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's gonna do it. Get a little supersized episode here at the Spin Cycle, but we will be back tomorrow. Thank you all for being with us here. Remember, please like, share, subscribe. If you haven't liked one of our pages yet, wherever you are watching this live stream or wherever you're getting it on demand and you haven't liked it or you haven't subscribed, do that. It's free. Takes less than a second. It helps the show out. We really appreciate it. RC, remind everybody where else they can see us, find us, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, Andrew, all things Watchman Action at watchmanaction.org. If you're looking for Watchman Action on social media, all the handles are Watchman Action. Get ready and get excited. Mama Bear's Perspectives from the Window are starting up 3 times a week. You're going to get the nuggets like you did today about that story. Imagine getting that 3 times a week on Facebook Live and in your reels and your stories. That's coming up. I'm going to do my walk and talks again, so we promote what's coming up. Also, you can watch the Spin Cycle weeknights 9:30 Eastern on the Watchman Action Network. That's channel 40 on Beck Cable in North Dakota, and streaming all over the world on YouTube, Rumble, and X.
All right. Well, for Juliana Ormond, R.C. Williams, I am Andrew Southwick. This has been the Spin Cycle. Thanks again for being with us today, and we will see you tomorrow.